Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously polarized legacy, that of the Ottoman Empire's final powerful ruler, Sultan Abdul Hamid II. He ruled for 33 years over an incredibly vast empire that stretched across Europe, Asia, and Africa. But, and this is crucial, this wasn't an empire at the peak of its power. Not at all. It was a state teetering on the absolute brink of total collapse. History rarely hands us simple answers, right? And when it comes to Abdulhamid II, the debate is just as fierce today as it was over a century ago. So you really have to ask yourself, was he a ruthless dictator who ruled with an iron fist, suffocating his own people? Or was he the last hero who valiantly tried to save a dying empire from just being carved up by global powers? Now, in this explainer, we aren't here to take sides. Instead, we're going to look at the historical ledger completely impartially. We'll examine his brilliant strategies right alongside his highly controversial rule, so you can weigh the facts and decide the truth for yourself. Okay, to really get a grip on his legacy, we've broken this explainer down into 5 chapters. The Last Guardian, the Grand Master's Moves, the Iron Fist, the Zionist Challenge, and finally, when the Guardian fell.
Let's jump right in to Part 1, The Last Guardian, Inheriting a Dying Empire. To understand the man, we first have to understand the massive crisis he walked into.
You know, Abdul Hamid II absolutely did not step into some golden age of wealth and stability. Actually, scratch that. It was a total geopolitical nightmare. His reign kicked off right alongside the catastrophic Russo-Turkish War of 1877. And the treaty that followed, the Treaty of San Stefano, was incredibly punishing. It didn't just bruise Ottoman pride. It physically stripped the empire of massive, highly crucial territories in the Balkans. This triggered these overwhelming waves of refugees flooding into the capital and basically bankrupted the state overnight. Imagine suddenly becoming the CEO of a crumbling enterprise, surrounded by aggressive competitors actively tearing your company apart at the seams. Survival wasn't guaranteed anymore. It was literally the only goal. Moving on to Part 2, the Grand Master's Moves, Geopolitics and Unity. Faced with this impending doom, the Sultan really had to get creative. He basically treated world politics like a giant chessboard through a brilliant divide-and-survive diplomacy. He knew for sure that his military couldn't defeat the combined might of the European empires. So, he made sure they never combined. He expertly played those aggressive Western powers right against one another. Take the British and the Russians, for example. He masterfully stoked tensions between them over access to the strategic Turkish straits, just making absolutely sure neither side could gain the upper hand against him. It was a high-wire balancing act of global proportions, using his enemies' own rivalries to stave off absolute collapse. But fending off external empires wasn't going to be enough. He desperately needed internal glue. So to fortify his state from the inside out, he championed the ideology of pan-Islamism. He heavily leveraged the shared identity of the Muslim world, positioning himself not just as a sultan, but as the caliph, the spiritual leader of all Muslims. Now, this was a direct existential threat to Western powers. Why? Well, think about it. Empires like Britain and France held millions of Muslim subjects in their own colonies, from India all the way to North Africa. By claiming their spiritual loyalty, he created a massive global ideological shield against foreign encroachment. And he didn't just talk the talk, he physically built this unity. He connected his vast, fragmented territory through some seriously massive state-of-the-art infrastructure projects. The Berlin to Baghdad Railway was a geopolitical masterstroke. It was aimed at strengthening economic ties with Germany, specifically so he could bypass British naval dominance. And then there was the legendary Hejaz Railway. This stretched right through the desert to safely transport pilgrims to the Holy Lands, which massively boosted his prestige and influence across the global Muslim world. It was rapid modernization driven by a desperate need for absolute unity. Which brings us to Part 3, the Iron Fist, the cost of state survival. We have to ask, did this impressive survival come at a devastating internal cost? Okay, so here is the ultimate historical paradox. To the West, and to his critics at home, he was known as the Red Sultan, a ruthless, incredibly paranoid dictator. To protect his state, he set up a massive secret police network, famously known as the Yildiz spy ring, which relied on tens of thousands of informants. He enacted severe censorship and aggressively crushed political dissent. But on the flip side, to his supporters, he was the last caliph, literally the only man with the unyielding strength required to hold a fracturing world together. In their eyes, those extreme measures were the only defense against total annihilation. Two totally different interpretations of the exact same reign.
So we're left with this really profound historical question. Does a constant existential threat of collapse justify the absolute suppression of internal dissent? Was his iron fist the only life support keeping the empire breathing? Or was it the exact thing suffocating its citizens and stalling real progress?
Let's look at part 4, the Zionist challenge, a defining diplomatic clash.
This specific clash still echoes heavily in modern geopolitics today. During his rule, the Sultan was heavily lobbied by Theodor Herzl, the founding father of modern political Zionism. Herzl attempted to use significant financial incentives and organize diplomacy to establish a Jewish foothold and purchase land in Palestine. And keep in mind, the Ottoman Empire was drowning in crippling astronomical debt to European powers at this time. Herzl offered to effectively pay off a massive portion of this ruinous debt in exchange for a charter for Palestine. We're talking about incredibly high-stakes negotiations involving massive sums of money that the empire desperately needed to stay afloat. But despite the empire being completely broke, Abdulhamid II definitively refused the offer. Regardless of the political pressure or the immense economic relief sitting right there on the table, he explicitly refused to sell Palestinian lands. This strict refusal is a defining pillar of his legacy. He rooted this decision deeply in his pan-Islamic ideology, insisting that the land didn't belong to him personally as a ruler, but rather it belonged to the broader Muslim Ummah, the community, whose blood had been spilled for it. It was a moment where ideology absolutely trumped immediate financial relief. And finally, part 5, when the Guardian fell, the empire's final days, and the inevitable unraveling of a grand strategy. So we saw how his rule kicked off in 1877, navigating the fires of the Russo-Turkish War. He played the chessboard, he built his railways, and he ruled with an iron fist. But eventually, the pressure from within just boiled over. In his later years, the Young Turks Revolution, which was driven by military officers and intellectuals demanding modernization and constitutional rule, systematically stripped him of his power in 1908 and 1909. And here is the crazy historical irony. The very modernizations he pushed for, the telegraphs, the railways, the Western-style schools, they actually created the educated, connected class that eventually overthrew him, and that set the stage for the absolute and ultimate dissolution of the Caliphate itself. So was his authoritarianism the poison that doomed his empire, or the bitter medicine that kept it alive against impossible odds for over 3 decades? Was his brilliant maneuvering the only reason it survived as long as it did? Red Sultan or Last Caliph? Hero or villain? We've laid out the facts, but the final verdict, well, that is completely up to you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.